Starting out for this project, you're going to need to move your raw photos from your folder, so make sure you're finding those images in there and then click and drag them into a new folder for this assignment. So I would create a new folder called raw, maybe make one folder for product images that are the fine art, and then one for the images that are the commercial art. So I would try and separate the two of those since you will have to make two different contact sheets eventually. We're going to start out in Photoshop, and when you go to open your picture, instead of going to File, Open, we're going to go to File, Open as Smart Object. So go there, and then find the picture that you're going to be working with, and hit Open. And you're going to notice right away that it brings you into a different screen, so this isn't what we're used to looking at with Photoshop. This is a different screen designated just for raw images. So with this screen, we're able to capture a lot more of those edits and adjust things a lot differently using these settings here. The nice thing about this format is that if you click this button at the bottom here, it's going to split the screen, so you're able to see your before and then after. So as you're editing, you can kind of see those adjustments, see if it works for the photo or if it maybe looked better before you created those adjustments. Up at the top, you're able to see the exposure and what those settings were. So you can see what the shutter speed was taken at, so 1/20th of a second, which is pretty slow. And then you can see the ISO and the aperture as well. We're going to adjust the temperature. The temperature of the lights in the studio is about 5500, so I'm going to try and bring that up to that temperature there, and you can see just a slight difference, and if you zoom in it might help a little bit to see that difference there, especially in the white areas. So just adjusting that white balance definitely helps to get rid of some of those blue values in the background there. Then we're just going to continue moving down towards the bottom here, so you can see the exposure, maybe brightening the photo a little bit to bring out some of those highlights, adding a bit of contrast, darkening the shadows, and you can see that difference right away here. For the highlights, maybe bringing some of those out, darkening some of those shadows again, looking at the whites, trying to make those a little bit more vibrant, so you can see those whites at the top of the image on the plate. And then clarity of the image, so you can see how this is starting to clarify my photo down at the bottom here. So really being able to see each little speck and highlight, adding all the details. Now when you get down to vibrance and saturation, you're not going to want to go crazy with that. You don't want to overdo it. So just maybe adjusting that slightly. And again, you don't want to do too much. And I'm going to zoom back out here. You can see that difference from before on the left and after on the right. Now don't hit OK yet. There's a few more edits we're going to be doing here. So if you go to the top of the screen, you'll notice this little curves button. We're going to click on that and adjust the S-curve. The nice thing about this is that it already has some set up, so you can see that slight S-curve that it adds for you with the medium contrast. You can do strong contrast. For mine that might be a little bit too much, but with some more of those studio lights that you've been working with, that might look a little bit better. Or you can just do custom and adjust it yourself. But the medium contrast probably will be working the best for this image. Now the next edit over is sharpening the image, so adjusting that detail. And I'm not going to do too much with it, but you can mess around with some of those settings, see what it does for your specific image. But moving on, this next one is black and white. I can click Convert to Grayscale. And the nice thing about this is that you're able to adjust those individual settings with each color. So I have a lot of different colors in here. So the reds and oranges, it might help to make a little bit brighter since it's pretty dark. And then maybe darken some of those yellows to create the contrast. So you can play around with some of those settings. Moving on over here, this is called the split toning. And what's nice about this is that you can give your highlights one value or one color, and your shadows down at the bottom a different color kind of tint to it. It's not going to work great for my photo that I have that has a lot of colors, but if you're taking a picture of something that's a little bit more neutral, so maybe like a silver watch, You could create in the highlights maybe some bright pink colors, and again, it's not going to show up too well on mine here, but adjusting that saturation will help. So maybe some warm colors for the highlights, or I could do some yellows. And then in the shadows, maybe doing some cool colors, so some blues to give it a little bit of that contrast. So that might work out okay for my image, again, since there's maybe some warm colors already in the highlights. But you could play around with that and see if you maybe want to have that contrast with warm colors and cool colors for your highlights and shadows. Now the last thing that we're going to experiment with a little bit is this overlay here. And this is creating basically an additional filter. So if there's somewhere in your image, and I'll zoom back out, but if there's somewhere in your image that you might want to edit as the only area that you're working on editing, so maybe just a small area at the front or maybe in the background, you can use this selection and just choose one area to edit. So maybe at the front of my image I want to bring out some of that detail. So I'm going to click on this here. So this is radial filter. You could also use this gradient filter, which will kind of fade it out a little bit more. But I'm going to use the radial filter and just click and drag across an area that I want to edit. So you can see right away that that kind of changed that blue color in here. So if I move this around, you can see that difference. So maybe I want this to stand out more. So I could go to the clarity and maybe increase that clarity to show more of the detail. And then just playing around with some of these settings. So again, this works well for an image where you maybe have some different water droplets off to the side, maybe that you could bring out more of the color in. Bringing this temperature down at the front might help my image a little bit. You can play around with the placement. But again, there's a lot you can do with the different selections here. Just find different areas in your image that you want to edit on their own. The only thing I would watch out for is over editing. So make sure that you're not doing too much, but give that a try. And when you have everything how you want it, we're going to hit OK. And that's going to open the image back up into Photoshop. So just like what we're used to working with. Now when you're in Photoshop, you can go in and adjust the levels and curves like we're used to if there's any maybe final edits that you need to do, maybe add a vignette. And the nice thing about opening this as a smart object, like what we did at the beginning of the video, is if you wanted to double click, you can open this back up into your settings here and go back and edit it again a little bit more. So you can see our before and after to see what we did. So we have the after and before. When you're finished, I would definitely save this in a Photoshop format so you can always go back and do more edits if you need to in the future. As you're working, maybe save your image every time you decide to try something different. That way you have a few versions to go back to.